Hey, welcome to the March 4th First Tuesdays with Heart, sponsored by the Heart Peer Support Team in connection with the Resiliency and Justice Center. HEART stands for Healing, Empowering, and Rebuilding Together. We're a peer support program for anyone impacted by any mass violence incident. So, well, real quick, I think most of you have met us, but just want to go through the HEART team. Alice is a licensed therapist. She's co-director of HEART. She's a Route 91 and UNLV support group facilitator. Jackie, who was our presenter tonight, is also a licensed therapist. She's a behavioral health program coordinator for the Resiliency and Justice Center. She was one of our original HEART coaches. And she also has another Route 91 support group along with the third Tuesdays with Heart that we have. And I'm Jill Winter. I'm the co-director of HEART. I'm a Route 91 survivor. I assist Alice with the UNLV support group and Jackie with third Tuesdays with HEART. So we always like to start out with something kind of positive, and this is so important. It's important for everybody, no matter what situation you're in, but especially when you're healing from a major trauma. It's so important to make yourself a priority. At the end of the day, we're truly our longest commitment. And that has a lot to do with sleep too. That's what Jackie's going to be talking about. Okay, so tonight's presenter is our own Jackie Harris. Jackie's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she was a drug and alcohol counselor as well, who's been serving the Vegas area for over 35 years, which I don't know how she's not that old.
Actually,
Um,
it's 40 this month, so
okay,
yeah,
I was trying to be nice.
I'm just being real.
So, Jackie was one of the first people to respond immediately after Route 91, and she partnered with the Vegas Strong Resiliency Center as a trauma expert after that was formed. And she's been working with the mass violence community ever since. In 2022, she became the behavioral health program consultant with the Resiliency Center. And in 2023, that moved into a permanent position as the behavioral health program coordinator. And so she's definitely a huge advocate of everyone who's been impacted by mass violence. Whenever Alice and I get a crazy idea, we go to Jackie because we know that people won't tell her no, which is wonderful. Um, so I'm going to turn it over to Jackie.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you guys tonight and, talk about an issue. I know that we have had a few other folks join us in the past and talk about sleep. We're going to go a little bit deeper into this topic and discuss trauma, PTSD, sleep, and also what to do with our nightmares, because those are things that happen and they're common. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So thank you. So a little bit about trauma and sleep. Sleep problems, as we know, I know I'm just stating the obvious, are common after experiencing a trauma. Distressing dreams can occur whether or not a person meets the full criteria for a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. There can be recurrent distressing dreams that are related to the traumatic event. That's actually one of the criteria for a PTSD diagnosis. Another one is hypervigilance, or feeling sort of keyed up and wound up, which can make it hard to fall asleep or get really good restful sleep. There can be sleep disturbance, which can include difficulty falling or staying asleep, or having very restless sleep. The research indicates, this is a pretty broad number here, but 70 to 91% of folks that have PTSD, the full diagnosis, have difficulty falling or staying asleep. And 19 to 71%, again, the research shows a really wide range of individuals with PTSD have nightmares. So the reason for adding some of this information in here tonight is it's important to understand that this is very common. And this is one of the things that many people deal with, and one of the things that can linger for quite some time. Next slide. So, it's really interesting. I started to dive into some of the research and some of the information again on nightmares, something I've done in the past. And I started to think about dreams in general. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking of is, when we're little children, or we as parents have kids, we always say the thing sweet dreams. But the interesting part is that the brain, when we fall asleep, is going to do what it's going to do. And sometimes I have really strange dreams. I'm like, what? You know, um, or we, all of us can have bad dreams or nightmares. We can also have, very sweet dreams, I suppose, really nice dreams. Um, and it's important to really differentiate or look at the difference between nightmares that are attached to trauma and just regular old nightmares. Like my significant other, I was doing this presentation, working on it a little bit at home, and he said, did I have a nightmare because you were working on this? I'm like, yeah, that's it. But he had a strange nightmare about being back in college, but being his age now and not being able to find his class. And, it was odd, it was distressing, it was a nightmare. But was it related to trauma? No. So when a person has nightmares that are related to trauma, they're different in several ways. One is frequency. If nightmares are related to a traumatic event, they occur more often and can sometimes be multiple times per night. They also differ in intensity. The emotional and physiological reactions that we have to them are typically stronger. They can be very different in content, in that they're more likely to be directly related to the traumatic experience, or they're related, the experience that you're having in the nightmare is similar but not exactly the same. The duration, PTSD nightmares can honestly persist for years, particularly without treatment. And there's more of an impact when we wake. When you have a nightmare and it's not related to trauma, you may wake up and feel disoriented or even panicked, or, gee, I didn't like that dream, but you shake it off much more quickly. It is true that if a nightmare is related to a traumatic event, it's going to stick with you or stay with you, the emotional impact. It could be throughout the day or for a longer period of time, or come back. So it's important to kind of differentiate those a little bit. Next slide. So the other thing that I think is important is that it's important to really understand, particularly with traumatic or trauma-based nightmares, that they actually serve a function. I think we think of them, of course, as distressing and upsetting and annoying and all the things we can think of, but they actually do serve a function. They are I did some research on this. They are the brain's attempt to process and relive the traumatic event. In some ways, because obviously when we're dreaming, it's completely unconscious. It's our deepest part of our brain, and we're not controlling it. It's just sort of free floating out there. It's really trying to make sense of a situation or event that our waking mind can't make sense of. I can't make sense of why this happened or what happened or how it happened. So our brain is really trying to understand it. The other function of nightmares is to help the brain process unresolved emotions, fears, and trauma. It's acting as a psychological coping mechanism. Feeling those feelings when we're asleep might be more tolerable than feeling them when we're awake. So it really is working through the emotions. They also allow the mind to explore scenarios and solutions that may not be accessible during waking hours. And they can enhance our self awareness. There are times, of course, I've worked with not only adults that have experienced traumatic events, but children as well. And, you know, kids can really, as just like adults can work through things and learn things about themselves and learn what maybe they would do differently, or somehow they would see things differently, or they remember things in their dreams that in their waking mind they have forgotten or pushed aside. So that it's important to understand that these nightmares, as upsetting and frustrating and all the things, they really do serve a function for us. Next one. So I love this. I don't remember if I read it somewhere or a training or something, but nightmares function to iron out the wrinkles in our experiences. I like that. That kind of makes me really feel like, okay, I'm not just having these nightmares because, you know, I'm losing it. I'm having, my brain is working. It's doing the work that maybe I can't do when I'm awake, or I won't allow myself to do, or so I really like that. I like the ironing metaphor, you know, and how it feels when we're, if you're ironing, to really smooth out those wrinkles. It can really feel good. Next slide. So, how do sleep issues affect PTSD symptoms? Kind of going back a little clinical. One of the earliest signs of PTSD is sleep disturbance. That is one of the biggest signs that tell, like, us as therapists and helpers, that there might be trauma that is unresolved there. Sleep problems interfere with the brain's ability to process memories and emotions. If there's a lot of sleep disturbance, it can slow down that recovery process. Many people, this is the challenging part, use alcohol and drugs to try to sleep better. Obviously, we know that is counterproductive. Um, when Jill had mentioned that I did have my license in alcohol and drug counseling for about 13 years. I was director of a substance abuse and mental health treatment program, and we worked with folks that were court ordered. And so their substance use was actually quite extreme. They were in trouble with the law or were involved with CPS, had children, you know, it was pretty bad. And I will tell you that the number one thing that we saw was trauma. And the number one thing that we also saw was folks trying to use substances to sleep. The challenge with substances is that they work until they don't, you know, and so obviously we don't want folks to use that to get the sleep, because you're actually, when particularly with alcohol, you're actually not getting restful sleep. You're not getting the type of sleep that is healing and is good for your recovery. It can worsen your sleep and aggravate PTSD symptoms. Next one. So the opposite of that is how does PTSD affect sleep? Insomnia. 9 out of 10 people with PTSD suffer from insomnia, um, typically due to hyperarousal, the challenge with falling asleep. And then it turns into sort of that cycle of I can't fall asleep. I'm stressed because I can't fall asleep. Now I'm anxious because I can't sleep and I gotta. So it kind of becomes a vicious cycle. Um, Nightmares or night terrors can lead to nighttime waking and difficulty falling back to sleep, or there can be repetitive dreams. And then we also see this was interesting in doing some research, finding I didn't know this, and now it's something that I definitely recommend clients who are having sleep issues. I would recommend you get a sleep study, that there is a higher prevalence of obstructive sleep apnea in people diagnosed with PTSD. I actually didn't know that till I was doing some research, and the type of devices that are available can really help a person to get the restful sleep. So if you are having sleep issues, definitely reach out to your medical provider. Get, make sure that the sleep apnea is not occurring. So I found that to be really interesting. Next one. So the question is, what do we do with it? One of the things that we're going to provide, I think, Jill, you're going to drop that link in the chat, right? Sorry.
Actually, Alice, if you can do that since I'm driving, please.
Thank you. Not literally driving, but yes. Okay. So, the Resiliency Center, as you know, does a tremendous amount of work with the National Mass Violence Center, and they have a really good handout on from the National Sleep Foundation, just giving some suggestions for sleep. And I know that we have a First Tuesdays recording with Dr. Alexis Kennedy that gives fabulous recommendations. Personally, I don't even get up in the night without thinking of Dr. Kennedy. I'm not joking. So one is keeping a cool, dark sleep environment. Um, it's recommended to reserve bedroom for sleep and sex only, versus using it like for work, watching TV, stuff like that, because then you're associating that room with those, activities of sleep and intimacy. A regular bedtime or regular routine can be really important. Um, Eating a healthy diet, eating late at night, eating like maybe heavier foods or foods that might upset your stomach. Obviously, that's not going to work well. It's kind of funny, the older I get, the more I understand now, like people eating dinner at 4 o'clock. I'm like, dude, I'm down for that. So just kind of knowing your own body and what works for you and what you can do. Um, Exercise, taking a walk at night or any kind of stretches, yoga, things like that are going to help your body. Avoiding stressors. It's really hard if we get into maybe a disagreement with someone in our home or someone on social media or someone outside of our home, like any kind of things. Try to not do work or watch something that may be upsetting or activating. A warm bath or a book can be really nice. White noise machines are really good. There's guided meditation on YouTube, which I recommend a lot, because it's great and free, where they have guided meditation for sleep, for anxiety, for trauma, for all kinds of things. The most important thing, which all of us know, when is that for folks who have been through a traumatic event, is that feeling of safety. And it's most important to sleep in a room or a space where you feel safe. I think I've shared before, I worked with a person who had a very complex trauma history. And she actually did not work. She was a little bit older, and she felt, we talked about this idea of safety, and she felt most safe if she slept, stayed awake at night, where she felt less safe during the dark, slept during the day or the early morning to mid afternoon, and slept on her couch in her living room. And I was like, okay. And she said, well, isn't that weird? And I'm like, well, it would be, I would never say weird because it's your choice. But first of all, you don't work, so you're not interfering, like you're not missing work because you can't sleep. Then we would have to work on something different. Your significant other, he actually works at night, so you're putting yourself on his schedule, and it kind of works better, and it's fine. No one's upset. And so when they started to do that, they got better sleep. So think about, where do I feel most safe? How do I feel most comfortable? Which room, what control can I take over my sleep environment versus what society or somebody tells you should be doing? Doesn't matter. We just want you to get restful sleep. Could be anywhere. All right. The next one, real quick. So, one of the things that I discovered along the way, quite a few years ago, I actually started discovering it in looking um, at when I was working with a veteran of the Gulf Wars. And is that the Veterans Association, one of the things that I kept coming across was this thing called nightmare rescripting. So I really got into that. Let me go to the next slide, if it's okay. This is actually the protocol, and we're going to put a link in the chat that's going to give you just the outline for it. And you can just Google nightmare rescripting and you can get images of this. This is very common. So the idea behind nightmare rescripting, and this is particularly effective for folks who have recurring nightmares of a similar nature, is that you want to write down what and part of it also is exposure and rescripting. So you want to write down the worst part of the nightmare, because typically when we're having a nightmare, it gets to a point where all of a sudden it shifts and kind of escalates, right? So that's the exposure part. You're kind of writing down when you're in a safe space, it's not happening, you're wide awake. What is the worst part of my nightmare? You also want to write down what emotions and feelings that you're having at that worst moment. It might be fear, it might be horror, it might be panic, it could be all kinds of things. Then this is when the rescripting part comes. The question is, what would you prefer to feel in that moment? And the next piece is, how would the story need to change for you to feel that way? I found some research, and this was really interesting, from the Veterans Administration. This was many years ago, but I've seen it repeated, that they did basically, I think it was 4 groups of veterans that were having nightmares. One, they didn't use this tool. They just did, therapy as usual. With one group, they had them talk about this, but not write it down. So when they came into session, they discussed it, but they didn't write it down. The third group were able to use like a computer or put notes on their phone. And then the fourth group hand wrote it out, like had these little papers. I would suggest if you can to print some or whatever, or just in a journal, use these prompts. And what they found is the group that hand wrote it actually had the biggest decrease in the nightmares. And what they were hypothesizing is that literally by handwriting the responses, the neural pathways in the brain were being redirected, which was really amazing. I've used this with adults. I've also used this with kids. I had a young girl that I was working with. Her nightmare was always a dragon was chasing her. And so, because she was quite young, instead of writing it out, she drew pictures and I wrote the words. And her way of changing it was some dance on social media was real popular then. And the way she changed it was she would turn around and kind of stand up to the dragon and then they would do the dance. And they went viral on, I don't think it was TikTok back then, but and so this is something that can happen because remember, in your dreams, you can have wings. You can have a sword all of a sudden show up in your hand. You can be transported somewhere else. There is no limit to your imagination and how you can change that dream to feel the feelings you would prefer to feel, which might be safe, strong, secure, surrounded. You could fly in like, tons of people. I remember years ago, I had a boss that was a bully. She really was. That's the only way to describe it. I'm 5'4". She was over 6 feet tall. I used this, and when I changed it, because my dream was I was always lost in a building. That's a common one for me. Y'all can look that up, tell my therapist. Anyway, but what was interesting is I wanted to feel strong enough to stand up to this person. So my change in my dream was I wanted to be as tall as her. And it was kind of cool because I wrote it out. It takes a couple times. You got to work with it. Redo those. All of a sudden, I grew. I was tall. It felt pretty cool. The ground was way down there, and I was even taller than her and was able to stand up to her. And so this is a tool. It does work. Obviously, you can even have a little fun with it, like maybe it is a dragon that flies in your dream and rescues you from your situation. Whatever it is, you can do it. Okay, let's go to we'll get to questions in a bit, but let's go to the next one. So some other ways to deal with nightmares, and I know we've talked about these, are grounding exercises. It's good to practice. I think I've talked about this before. These grounding techniques or exercises when you're calm, so that when you are activated and you're in a high emotional state, your brain goes, oh, I know what this is. This breathing helps me to feel better. This breathing helps me to calm down. That I'm going to be, okay with this. And so that's important to practice, think of things that work for you. It might be breathing. It might be 5 things you see, 4 things you hear. It could be anything. Remember, anything to do with the 5 senses. And we're going to get to that. The other thing, the next step is to establish a routine to return to sleep that's grounded in the 5 senses. remember that our five senses, our sight, our sound, our taste, our touch, and our smell are often the things that activate our nervous system. And those are also the things that can calm us down. So I worked with somebody who had extreme nightmares due to trauma. And when they would wake up, they had a routine. Cold water can be very good. It can really bring down the central nervous system back into that parasympathetic recovery. So when they would wake up, they would get up, they would splash their face with cold water, particularly the neck is good, the front and the back. Sometimes on our arms, and put your hands in it. They would then go to their kitchen and get a glass of ice water and drink some cold water. And if they were quite activated, and they would go outside, even if it was cooler out, sometimes put their feet in the pool and pet their dogs. So there was a tremendous amount of sensory calming that was happening, and that is a very positive thing. And we set up that routine, and that would work to then get them their central nervous system recovered enough so they could try to fall back asleep. The challenge is often when we wake up from a nightmare, we are very activated. Our heart might be pounding, our breathing might be shallow, all kinds of things. What you need to do is make sure to calm that nervous system down, because if you're escalated, you're not going to be able to fall back asleep. It's just not going to happen. So getting a routine is going to be really helpful. For some folks as well, medication can be helpful. There are medications that can help with anxiety. And in some circumstances, there is medication that actually eliminates dreams altogether. But that is something obviously to talk to a physician or a psychiatrist about, but just want to put that out there.
So we just wanted to wrap up. Just a reminder, while the integrative services programs offered through the Resiliency and Justice Center are available to anyone impacted by any mass violence incident. But as far as anyone impacted, this is family, friends, first responders, community responders. So they're all able to access these free programs. All of these are virtual with the exception of the equine therapy demonstrations. That does take place in Vegas. And if you happen to be in Vegas, if you don't live there, you're more than welcome to go if you're visiting, and they're doing one at the time. So all of these, information on these programs can be found at the resiliencyandjustice.org/calendar. And this is just a quick shot of what the calendar looks like. Anything that is not event specific is open to anyone impacted by any mass violence incident. And then, of course, we have third Tuesdays coming up in 2 weeks. We'd love to see you all attend there. Lots of additional support. If you would like to be paired with a heart mentor, it's one-on-one. You can go to resiliencyandjustice.org/heart and click on request heart peer support. The disaster distress helpline was created for people who have been impacted by man-made and natural disasters. It's 24/7, and it doesn't have to be somebody who's feeling suicidal. It could be somebody who wakes up in the middle of the night and just needs somebody to talk with. So, that's a really good number to have on hand, just in case you're going through something, you want a crisis counselor to talk with. Jackie mentioned that the NMVC, the National Mass Violence Center, they have a lot of resources through both their website and their virtual resiliency center. The Transcend NMVC app was actually created by several people through the Resiliency Center. I'm sorry, through the National Mass Violence Center. It was created specifically for people who've been impacted by mass violence. There's a lot of really good information on there. Our presenter last month was Dr. Almadel Smith, is one of the people who does a lot of the speaking on the app, and she's got an incredibly soothing voice. So I would definitely, it's one that I know Alice absolutely loves, and I would definitely encourage everyone to check that out. And it's good to have just in case. Um, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. We have a Facebook page if you're not already on it for First Tuesdays with Heart. We'll have all of the recordings from all of our previous presentations on there. I also post it to as many of the Facebook pages that I know about, but you can always find them on the First Tuesdays page. And for those of you who like to cook, we have a Cooking for Post-Traumatic Growth that is just more of a fun page for anyone impacted by mass violence. So if you're looking for a recipe, if you like to cook and want to share recipes, feel free to join it. Next month, super excited to bring in Crystal Woodman Miller, talking about talking to kids about mass shootings. Crystal is a Columbine survivor, and I was lucky to have gone through the Triumph Over Tragedy program through Onsite with her. She's an amazing person. She's a mother of three. She's an author. She's written, I believe it's called a kid's book about school shootings. And she does do that. I think it's on YouTube where she reads it out loud. So you don't even need to buy the book if you just want to watch it. She's an amazing person. And she does go out and she's spoken for many years, advocating for people impacted by mass violence. She actually just told me she's been on a speaking tour the last few weeks. So she's a definitely good person to have in our corner. And I think, hearing her talk about that, it's something that's really hard for people to do, whether it's your own incident, whether it's the incidents that you hear about in the news. Um, she's an amazing person. I think it's going to be a great presentation. So we really appreciate everybody joining us. It's always a good evening. I love all the education we're getting. I know it's definitely helping me. So hopefully you guys are finding it helpful as well. And this recording will be available, we hope, in about a week or so. And then 2 weeks from tonight, we'll be back for Third Tuesdays. Jackie will be back. So thank you guys for joining us.